Uh-huh.
Hello, highlighters. Erin King here. Welcome to today's episode of the Highlights Podcast. Today, I am so stoked to introduce Denise Jacobs, one of my favorite people, and the author of Banish Your Inner Critic, the premier handbook on silencing fears to unleash creativity. Denise is a speaker, author, creativity evangelist, founder and CEO of The Creative Dose, and the head instigator of the Creativity Revolution. Denise, what is up?
Girl, how you doing?
Doing great. It's so good to see your gorgeous face. And I just loved your book. I mean, I could not put it down. It was breakthroughs left and right. Guys, if you are listening to this and you have that inner critic voice that is telling you you are not good enough, you are not worthy enough, you are not creative enough, Denise's book will literally shatter some breakthroughs. I will tell you this, Denise.
Mm.
I didn't realize that I had an inner critic. I really didn't. And I was reading your
Really?
book. And what was interesting is you talk a lot about this voice that we have, this
Mhm.
voice that's telling us all these different false narratives. For
Right.
me, mine isn't a voice, it's more like a vibe. I just feel like I'm not worthy of these different things. And
Mm.
I was boohooing in a couple of chapters, but we're going to get into all of that.
Woo!
Before we dive in, how do you define your inner critic? What does yours sound like? And how do we know that that's what's happening? That's what's going on in these situations.
So mine is very is very disparaging, and she's like, kind of one of my kind of big things is like it's never enough, right? Like
Mhm.
whatever it is I'm doing, that's nice and all, but it's not enough. Like you need to do
Mm.
more. Like
Totally.
like you need to achieve more, you need to be more successful, like, oh, that's cute that you got, like, however many thousands of followers on platform, but you really need to have this, or you really need to. And so it's always like, okay, that's nice, but what else, right?
Mm.
So I have that kind of narrative in my head very frequently,
Mhm.
and then that often is will push me to burnout and things like that, like to overwork, to work too long, to, like, push yourself. I mean, I'm sure you've had it where you're exhausted, right? You're like, I've been on the computer for about a trillion years and I'm like literally can't keep my eyes open. And for me, I'll have something that's like, yeah, but you need to, like, just finish this one extra, these two,
Mhm.
three, I'm sorry, 10, 5, 10, well, like 12 things,
I
15, and then you can get off the computer, right?
know.
And so, like, I feel like that's my inner critic shows up a lot like that.
Mhm.
It's not like a voice per se so much as it is this like driving force
Mhm.
that I know logically is unnecessary, right?
Mhm.
I know logically that I don't I you know what, no puppies are going to die if I don't do the 15 more things on the computer. And frankly, if I can't keep my eyes open, it probably means I'm tired and I should like
Yeah.
rest, right?
Yeah. It's
So, yeah.
It's so true. And for those of you listening, if you're a creative, whether you are an entrepreneur, you're a writer, a speaker, an author, even
Preach.
if you're running any business in 2020 and you have to create content for social media, just
Right.
everyday posts, you might find yourself feeling blocked. Is my
Mhm.
story big enough? Do I really have something to share with the world? Does
Mm,
anyone care? There's
mm,
so many of these questions going on. And what Denise's book does a great job doing is it really kind of helps us understand why we do this in the first place. Let's
right.
unpack the origins of the inner critic, and then let's go into kind of what we possess, which you shared these three keys we possess to
Exactly.
begin to overcome them step by step and really break free and be able to be more creative people.
Right. So the inner critic, I mean, and I always feel like this is a really important thing to recognize about the inner critic, because the more you get in touch with this truth, the easier it is to start to deal with it, right? So the inner
Mhm.
critic is this psychological construct that develops at a young age from these experiences that we have when we hear negative commentary and criticisms from people who are important to us: parents,
Mm.
teachers, other peers, coaches, music teachers, librarians, whatever. Anybody in a position of authority that that we respect and that we feel like we need, we are trying to please often in some ways. If we get any kind of criticism or anything like that, then that kind of pops up, and our psyche goes, okay, look, that was awful.
Yeah.
I am going to like create this, like, I'm going to be your shield. I am
Mhm.
going to make it so that you avoid doing any kind of behavior that will attract this kind of criticism again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it pops up, and again, it develops over time. The more experiences you have, the stronger, I imagine, your inner critic will be, and it goes into a part of your brain actually that's called implicit memory, and that's the kind of memory that tries to guide you automatically with like subconsciously. So like if you, for example, if you see a snake somewhere, like, and you're afraid of snakes, if you ever go to that area again, you will be aware, like you will be like wary, right? Like thinking,
Yes.
I need to like just be on my alert, even, and you might not even remember, or you'll probably remember really well, but like you will automatically feel nervous being in this area, even though like that snake thing happened like 20 years ago.
Denise, that's an exact example. We have mountains here behind our house and we mountain
Uh-huh.
bike every day. And we saw this huge snake. It was probably 3 years ago. And every time I walk by
Every
that
time.
one section, my heart flutters. I'm like, the snake's not there. It is a real example. So that's kind of what we do with bad experiences, is what you're saying. Like something happens, and even though the situation's not being replicated,
Right.
our bodies are kind of preparing us for a potential snake attack, right?
Right, right. A snake attack is actually a great way to think about it,
A
right?
sneaky snake attack.
Sneaky snake in the grass attack. And
Yeah.
so and so we do this, and we kind of develop all of these shields, which we think are going to help us, but a lot of times, as you probably have, seen and experienced and whatnot, people that you've worked with, clients you've worked with in your own life and other people's life, um, a lot of times it doesn't, it stops being helpful at some point, right? It starts to
Yes.
be something where it becomes a source of self-sabotage. It becomes a way that we hold ourselves back from potentially achieving our greatness and achieving what we're capable of. And then that's really sad because, I believe like all of us have like gifts to bring to the world, and if we're holding ourselves back, if we're making ourselves small, then a lot of times we can't actually access those gifts, and we can't actually share them to help to make the world and our own world and the world around us better.
It's so true, and you talk about in your book, you're tall. How tall? You're
6'1".
6'1". So you're this beautiful tall woman, but as a kid, you played volleyball and basketball, I think,
Basketball.
and you said that as a gal growing up, you kind of like wished you were smaller. You tried to, and we all had that thing from our childhood, right? Everyone listening right now, you can call to mind that one thing growing up that just made you feel like maybe everyone was judging you or thinking you weren't good enough, and so you try to downplay those pieces of yourself, right?
Or that they had these expectations of you. I mean, I actually didn't I didn't dislike being tall. What I disliked was the expectation that
Mm,
me being tall meant I was going to be an amazing basketball player, right?
mhm,
Or me
mhm,
being bigger than other kids meant that somehow I was going to be aggressive and I was going to want to fight. And I was like,
mm.
I want to go to the library and like chill out and not talk to anybody while I
Yeah.
read Greek mythology. That's what I want to do. I have no idea why you think I need to want to fight. So that kind of thing of this kind of like cognitive dissonance in a way
Yes.
of feeling like, okay, I'm this certain way, and yet people look at me. And I mean, this is actually very, very been exemplified with the Black Lives Matter movement and the
Mhm,
anti-racism movement. It's like black people are getting shot because they're black,
mhm,
or like, or being like, suspicious. And it's like, I'm literally not a dangerous person,
mhm.
but your perception or your judgment, snap judgment ahead of time, you have these expectations of me that are like completely unfounded.
Yeah, so how do we, I mean, because that's a big part of your book. You talk a lot about how we deal with this fear of being negatively evaluated by others, whether it's
Woo! Whew.
right? I mean, whether it's Black Lives Matter or just you name like a movement that's going on right now, everyone has something that is near and dear to them that is affecting them personally. And so, how do we do a better job dealing with that fear of people, even like this podcast? I mean, when I started this podcast,
Mm.
I was like, does the world really need another podcast?
Well,
Really? Like, you know what I mean?
well,
And I started doing this, and it blocks us from stepping into that power. So, how do we deal with that?
so I said, so there's a, I mean, that's actually, there's a lot of different layers to that, right? There's a lot to unpack. I think one of the things is, I mean, again, multiple ways of looking at this. One way, like just to, like, for example, with you and your podcast, one of the things that I think, and again, this kind of goes back to the, like, you've got these gifts, right? You've
Mhm.
got these gifts. I mean, you've got a natural gift and also love for speaking, for teaching people, for engaging with people, for having dialogue about things, right? For really helping people do their best work to, have their put their word and their message out through social, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
It would be a loss for people for you to not to share that,
Mhm.
right? Like, and so a lot of times it's like you're the only person. Yeah, there's a lot of people who talk about, similar type of things, but nobody talks about it the way you do. You've
Mhm.
got like a large following. The people who follow you want to hear what you have to say, or they wouldn't be. So,
Mhm.
and maybe the world doesn't need another podcast in general, but your people actually do in some ways need and benefit from this additional thing that you're putting out, right?
Yeah.
And
It
so
yeah.
and so sometimes just to say, this is something that I have to give, right? Like to have
Mhm.
this kind of, one of the things I talk about a lot in the book is being self-referential
Yes.
and not having this be about what does this mean, vis-a-vis other people? Or what does
Mhm.
this mean? Like, how is this compare to X, Y, and Z thing? Well, when you're the only one of something, you can't compare to anybody else because there's nothing else to compare to, right? And so I think sometimes having that bit of clarity of being so self-referential and being like, look, this is only about me.
Yeah.
Like, this is not me in relationship with anybody else. This is about me, and this is about like my own personal growth and my own actualization in the world and my own professional contributions to the world. This is what I have to do.
Yeah.
It's a journey I'm going on. We'll see. We'll see
Yep.
what happens, right? Um,
Wha
Go ahead.
So I was just gonna say, why is it so hard? I get so many DMs from different followers, and what they really struggle with is sometimes that inner critic is developed from childhood, like we're talking about, whether it was, feeling you were too tall or feeling like you were too much, or like for me, they were always
Too
like,
much.
"You're so loud and aggressive, like,
Right.
be a girl," and you're like, "Oh, this is like,"
What does that even
yeah,
mean?
like, but so maybe it's from childhood, right? But maybe what the message I get from a lot of people is, I was actually feeling like I was doing all right, like I was pretty good at what I was doing, and then I went online and started looking around, and there's everyone's highlight reel, and we
Everyone's highlight
people
reel.
have talked to death about like Instagram's bullshit. It's all, it's not real life. It's everyone's curated perfect filter. We talk about mute and block and unfollow, and this advice is not new. But I think the real question that I have for you, being an expert in this space, is for my followers who are listening, who are saying to themselves, it's literally a daily battle to keep my eyes on my own paper.
The
Do you
down
have any
battle.
tricks that you use to not try and stack up? Like in our space, people that have done such a great job reinventing during COVID and building out studios, and then other
Hmm.
speakers are like, God, I'm just trying to get my Zoom, to
Word.
not be boring. So
Right.
so what do you do? Like what's your trick for that? For us to be better at that?
So I mean, part of it is to, I mean, I definitely talk about this in the book. Part of
Mhm.
it is to block, or to manage like being on social, right? like
Yeah.
like I my Facebook consumption, and I say consumption more so than like use or participation, because it's like my Facebook consumption has like increased exponentially since COVID. Like I was very much like, face, I don't need to be on nobody's Facebook. I got like things to
Right.
do with my life, right?
In real life. Yeah.
Now Now it's just like, what are people doing? What's happening? What's going on?
I
I want to
know.
share this, like, very cute cat video because it's adorable. And the people are like, oh my God, you're killing with the videos. It's great. And I'm just like, oh no, I'm falling down into the abyss again.
I
Um,
know.
but I do think that there is, like, to have that, again, to have that kind of clarity, or to have that perspective, and to be able to say, okay, this is what's triggering me. Like, what I always say
Mhm.
is recognize what your triggers are, and then avoid them, right? Like, block them. Like,
Yeah.
I don't need to be on Facebook as much as I am. If magazines, like, there's so many things that I had identified for myself as magazines. Like, please don't put another 30 under 30 list in front of me. I will scream. Like, I'm just like,
So you know your triggers, so you
like, I
avoid
know
it.
my triggers,
Yeah.
and so I'm just like, I'm not gonna read that stuff because it's just
Yeah.
gonna trigger me. So I think that's really important. And then I think it's also like, to, again, the being self-referential, like, to say, okay, what progress have I made? Right? Like, what am I doing?
Mhm.
What's within the realm of what I can do? What do I have the bandwidth for? Not everybody
Yeah.
has the same amount of bandwidth. I mean, I know a
Mhm.
lot of people, myself included, who have been, like, battling depression during this time. Look, I'm not trying to win any, like, awards or anything. I'm like, can I manage to, like, not cry today? Fantastic. Right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm like, people have built their studios. I got a ring light. I got a lav mic that I
Yeah.
literally haven't taken out of the package yet. Um, at some point, when my bandwidth is higher and I can do this, then I'll do this. Like, I'm not the same person as X, Y, and Z person who's built their
Yeah.
studio out. I don't have the same resources. I don't have the same motivation. And I also have, like, different things that I'm focused on. So
Yeah.
again, just, like, being really like, this is where I'm at, and this is what
Mhm.
I can do right now. And also, I think it's really helpful, and I didn't talk about this in the book, but I think it's really helpful just in this kind of time of COVID and pandemic, and multiple traumas surfacing in so many different ways. To really, like, have people that you can talk to, and have people that you can go to for emotional support, who can be the person who's just like, man, you don't need to do that. Like, I have a really good friend, my friend Jeff Shaw. Actually, Jeff from our speaking group. And Jeff has been like, great for me to be like, you know what, like, this is not a time for you to be, like, going out and doing yippee skippy stuff. He's like, recharge, regroup, rejuvenate. When you've done that, then you can move forward more powerfully. And I'm like,
Yeah.
thank you.
That permission feels so good. It just feels
It
like a
does.
cozy blanket. So let's talk a little bit about these different sides of ourself, because in your book you talk
Mhm.
about, we have this inner critic, and you talk about naming it and drawing it. And it's so funny because if you guys are listening, we all have our best version of ourselves, and we all have our WTF version of ourselves. Personally, I have named mine. I have two names. So when I am living my best life, I call myself Destiny. Okay. That is
All
Destiny is
right.
my sassy, like, I'm really doing it. Right.
Go,
My
go.
worst version of myself, where I am just spending too much time on Netflix or social media, or I'm being negative, or all of a sudden I'm finding myself getting in fights with people. And, after the third or fourth fight, you're like, okay, it's not everyone else, it's you. And you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself, as my friend Judy Holler always quotes. Um,
Mhm.
but that girl's name is Sandy. Okay. So Sandy is like, I'm like, Sandy, get out of here. Like, you get one more day of this and then you are gone. Like, so I
So
have these two sides, like Sandy and
that's so
Destiny.
interesting.
You talk about naming yours and managing them and tapping into these things we have to recognize when we are listening to this bullshit narrative that's
Mhm.
blocking us from creating. And it is so dangerous. So what is yours called? How do we figure out why is this exercise helpful for managing that kind of negative self-talk?
So mine's name is Norma,
Okay.
because she's normal, right? Like, she's like,
Okay.
so, like, let's just play it safe. Let's not be big. Let's, like, just tone it down, and, like, and a lot of that is a lot of stuff that I got taught, right?
Yeah.
Because, and, being a 6'1" Black woman who's, like, really smart and, wants to achieve and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of folks who are intimidated and who were going to try to tell you you're too much and
Mm.
and this all of that stuff, or you're not enough, but it's because they're intimidated and they know you're a lot. So God bless them all. So Norma is my kind of inner critical voice. And um and honestly, like, my best self is like, it's just Denise. Like,
Yeah.
it's me. Like, I am not, when and one of the things, so this is somewhat tangential, and then I'll get back to the original question. But one of the things I love about speaking is that when I get on stage, I feel like I step into the grandest, most powerful and magnificent version of myself. Like, if I'm having a really good speaking day, it's like it's just coming through me. It's not me trying to be anything other than who I truly am. And that's one of the things that for me is so powerful and attractive and compelling about speaking, is that I feel truly myself when I'm on stage and when I'm speaking. And so one of the things about naming it, I think, and giving the inner critic a name and dealing with that, is that you realize that it's not you, right? Like, so much of that stuff that we've internalized, so many of those voices, so much of that is stuff that we have picked up from other people, things that we have
Mhm.
learned from other people, behavior, and treating ourselves the way these other people treated us. It's not intrinsic to ourselves. And
Mhm.
so when we give it a name, when we do that, we start to externalize it. And there's actually a word, a term for it, uh, which I am totally blanking on right now, but that I talk about a lot. When you talk to yourself in the third person, you create this kind of psychological distance. And so you do that, you can do that to the positive, but then when you actually name a different part of yourself, then you create even more psychological distance, so that you know that it's not you, it's this kind of other part, and that it takes away its power, right? And the other thing, actually, sorry, one more thing that I wanted to add to that is another really powerful tool, in addition to naming your inner critic and then creating
Mhm.
that psychological distance, is to look at your inner critic and to give your inner critic compassion. So
Mm.
to look at it as if, like, one of the images that I got when I was writing the book is that it's this part of you that developed when you were very young. So instead of it being like this big, powerful, scary thing, if you can look at it as if you and see it like a child playing at being this authority figure,
Mhm.
like a little girl in, like, and this, I'm sorry, this is very gendered, so, but this is kind of easier to visualize, but like a little girl in a, like, playing to be like a mean strict librarian, or a little boy, and again, very gendered, I totally realize that, but just for visualization purposes, a little boy playing at being a policeman, right? Like, with, like, imagining a child in, like, the clothes that are too big and the shoes that are too big and the
Sure.
and you're like, oh my god, this inner critic isn't even necessarily, in some ways, not even really a mature part of my psyche. It's this very young part of my psyche, but that it thinks that it's doing what it thinks you're supposed to do.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a big thing you talk about in your book. I mean, you really do talk about how we can stop trying to fit into someone else's mold.
Word.
And in these times in particular, I think because all of our lives have changed so drastically for most of us. Some people
Hmm.
I know are living their best pandemic life, and yay for them.
Yeah.
Um, and other people are not. So everyone's on different spectrums of the corona coaster. But there's also becoming sort of this new mold, I think, that's being created. This is
Mm.
how you're supposed to operate in pandemic times. And there really is no pandemic playbook. So, in a way, it is this grand reset for all of us to begin to reprogram those thoughts, begin to
Mhm.
rewire those parts of our brains. And
Mhm.
as someone who's also struggling in these times, we're all searching for those silver linings. And so I think one of the positive parts of your book is what you reveal is there are these three kind of powers that we have inside of us right now. So if you're listening and you've been nodding your head like, oh my God, I totally am feeling what Denise and Aaron are saying. The good news is there are 3 keys you possess right now in
Right.
Denise's book that you can unlock and tap into to clear away this bullshit and start
Exactly.
to really step into that authenticity. So can you walk us through this?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I call them mental power tools. And the great thing is about it is that it's not like you need to go out and try to get them. You don't have to develop them. You don't have to like go into therapy to get in touch with them. Like you already have them, right?
So
So the
good.
first one is actually physical, and
Okay.
that is neuroplasticity. That is our brains have the ability to change and adapt in the face of different stimulus. So, and one of the things I have joked around with the keynotes that I've done in, during the pandemic is, and Lord knows that that means that our brains have changed a lot over those last several months because we have had all kinds of different, totally different stimulus than we had before, right?
God, so
Um,
true.
so the cool thing about neuroplasticity is just that, like, if you get any kind of different stimulus, your brain is going to be like, oh, okay, let me like work with that, and that's basically what happens. That's how we learn, right?
Yep.
And we are constantly learning. Now, the also the very cool thing about it. Sorry, I'm geeking out on neuroscience here, but the other cool thing about neuroplasticity is that it can be controlled and managed through attention and focus. As a matter of
Mhm.
fact, attention and focus has been called the gateway to neuroplasticity. So, we want to do an exercise.
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, so this is an exercise I love to like run people through to get them in touch with attention and focus.
Okay.
It also actually gets people in touch with the second power tool, which is mindfulness.
Mm.
And mindfulness is kind of your ability um, to be aware of your thoughts without getting kind of sucked into them, right? To kind of have like a bit of distance away from your thoughts, to know what you're thinking, to know what you're feeling without necessarily being inside of them. Okay, so this is what we do. You put up both of your hands in front of your face like this, and then you just put all of your attention on one hand. Just one hand. You've got two of them, but you don't have to pay
Oh,
attention to the second one. Just
okay.
one hand. Put all of your attention and your focus on that one hand. And then imagine, and when I say attention focus, like look at the hand, like really pay attention to it. Look at the lines in your hand, look at the, veins underneath the skin, like really like get into that hand like you haven't in a long time. Now, while you're doing that, imagine that this hand is also holding all of the thoughts that you don't want to be thinking. Like, I am not doing pandemic right. Why are other people like killing it on Instagram and I'm not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whatever it is. Imagine that this hand is holding all of those negative inner critical thoughts. Now, once you're kind of gotten, settled in with that, I want you to slowly take your attention and your focus and shift it to your other hand. Now, take this hand and do the same thing. Look at how, like, all the details about it, really put your focus and your attention on it. And then imagine that this hand is holding all of the positive things that you want to think. Like, I have to just stay in my lane. I have to like run my own race. Can't compare myself to other people. My process is my process and nobody else's. My experience is my experience and nobody else's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I have a question for you. Is your first hand still there? Do you care about your first hand now that you're so focused on your second hand? Yeah,
Nope.
exactly. And so this is the kind of thing where you think, oh my God, I have been thinking this set of thoughts, but I've been thinking this set of thoughts because I'm so focused on them.
Mm.
What happens to my brain when I start to focus on this whole other set of thoughts?
Mhm.
What does that actually do? Like, what is that? How can I change like what my brain is doing? You can focus on other things, right? And so it's a really powerful tool. I feel like it really embodies this kind of mental process that you can be doing.
Yeah.
And so I always like to tell people, whenever you find yourself kind of going down the rabbit hole and, starting to like, spin on things that you don't want to think about, put your hands up and like shift your attention from one hand to the other and realize that you can do the same thing with your thought processes.
Denise, that is so good. I mean, where thoughts go, energy flows. And that is
Right.
so, so strong. I think everyone listening probably could even look at their two hands and make one hand the way things used to be and make the other hand the way things are going and where we're headed, right? It's kind of like the past is in one
Mhm.
hand, then like the present and the future is in the other one.
Word,
So, I mean,
word.
that's so strong. So your second key is mindfulness. And I love that
Right.
you brought this up because I think mindfulness is one of the most misunderstood, tricky skills to master. I struggle with it big time. Every single
Mhm.
morning, I do my 5 minute. I set my timer, and I roll my eyes, and I'm like, "Here we go,
Ah!
mother f." I'm like, mother effing meditation, like, bleh, like the worst. Okay, so I close my eyes, and my brain is on the hamster wheel and going to crazy town. And what is worse than being alone with your thoughts? Nothing. And
Mm.
it's so funny because I know with mindfulness, what we're supposed to do is take moments to just observe what we're thinking, but I find it so hard to do that. So, do you have any tricks that you can share with our listeners if they're trying to be more mindful, if they're practicing meditation or yoga or just breathing, you know,
Yeah.
intentional breathing? How can they become better at observing what they're thinking?
So one of the things, or so one of so I've done, I meditate, and the meditation practice that I do is Vipassana meditation. And if anybody's heard of the 10-day silent retreats or anything like that that you go on, those are the kind of things that I have done in the past have
Okay.
been great. One of the things with Vipassana meditation, and this is certainly like a very kind of condensed, shortened version of it, but that
Yeah.
you focus on the sensations in your body. You don't focus on your thoughts, because if you focus on your thoughts, you'll start getting into your thoughts. The point is to not get into your thoughts. The point of meditation is to be present, right? Is to just be present, be present in the moment. And one of the best ways of being present in the moment is feeling your body. So if you are sitting in for 5 minutes, like, and the other thing that's really cool about that is that it can be very pleasurable, right?
Hmm.
If you're just breathing and you're so focused on the way your breath feels going into your body and going into your lungs, and feeling your diaphragm, like, or your belly move out and your belly move in, and like really focus on feeling everything that you can possibly feel in that process, that 5 minutes will go boop like that. And you will also gain like a different awareness of your thinking. Like if you're thinking and you're just like, oh, that's nice. What I really want to do is I really want to feel this. Or
Hmm.
like you're like, oh, there's like a tingling feeling when I do. Oh, oh, my lungs aren't taking in as much air as I thought. That's interesting. Like, and you just, right, or whatever. You're like, oh, my belly, like, oh, that was really nice. Oh, let me see if I can do that again. Like, so that I feel like is a really helpful thing. And then that gets you away from, you're being mindful because you're being mindful of your breath,
Yeah.
not so much of your thoughts,
Thoughts. I love that.
right? Yeah.
That's so good. Tell us about the third power. The third.
Right. The third power. Thank you for keeping me on track. So the third superpower that we have is self-compassion. And I kind of talked about this a little bit. I know. Woo!
This one's
I
so hard.
talked about this when I was talking about the being compassionate, having compassion for your inner critic. Well, so what I usually the template for self-compassion that I usually give people is this. So everybody is born with compassion. Everybody has the capacity to show compassion towards themselves, right? And so a lot of times people are like, I got nothing, right? Like I am like my biggest worst critic. I will beat myself up with a stick before anything else happens. And so what I tell people, and I kind of walk them through the process of thinking about a friend, and thinking if a friend came to you and said, I am having a worse, not living my best life during pandemic, totally comparing myself to other people, thinking that I suck, all of the things. Like, what would you say to this person? If somebody
Mm.
called you up and was just like, I am having such a hard time. This is what's going on. all the things that you would say to this person, all the feelings that you had, you probably would be like, and that sound that you made, um,
Yeah.
right?
Or yeah.
Right, that, like, oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry, right? Take everything, the way you feel, the thoughts that you have, the things that you would say, right? The actions that you would do. You take all of those things and you direct them towards yourself.
Mm.
And if it means that what you do, and this is the kind of self-distancing thing that I was talking about, and that's what it's called. It's called self-distancing. I don't know why I couldn't think of it before, but do something called self-distancing and talk to yourself in the third person. So Aaron, you would be like, "Oh, Aaron, I am so sorry you feel that way. You know what? You're okay, Aaron. You're this, this, and this." And just talk to yourself like you would be same way you would talk to a friend.
Yeah. That's
And
so
that's
funny.
how,
Oh, go ahead,
right?
sorry.
No, I was going to say, so, and that it would be you actually putting self-compassion into practice, right?
I
Into
love that
action.
so much. My husband makes fun of me all the time because I didn't know that's what I was doing until I read your book. So I have two things I do. The first thing is when something's going wrong. My husband is incredible. We are best buds. He is Mr. Supportive, super feminist. He's awesome. And he is Southern and has kind of like no tolerance for like any kind of, he's like, don't be such a whiner, just get it done. He's a kind of a tough cookie a little bit sometimes.
Okay.
So I'll go, poor me, poor me, poor me. And I'll give myself like a little minute to like feel sorry for myself. And then I'm like, we got this. And then I move on. But it's like acknowledging my feelings for a second, giving myself a little
Mhm.
like grace that things are not okay. But then taking a second, just a little acknowledgement and then moving on. The second thing I have is he also makes fun of is when something happens that's a small win. I
Mhm.
know for me, a lot of people listening as well, we're all such achievers and go-getters. And so if it's not the win, we feel like maybe it was a failure. And
Mhm.
so what I have to focus on, my inner critic is like, that wasn't good enough. There's more, there's better, the whole perfectionist
Mm.
thing. So what I try to do is celebrate my little wins along the way to not let my inner critic, Sandy, get a chance to come at me and say that we're not good enough. And so I just do a little pat on the back and I say, good job, me. Good job, me. And he makes fun of me all the time because something will happen and I'll realize it was a little win. And to keep Sandy at bay, to keep Sandy being like, this isn't the big win, I'll just go, good job, me on my back. And he thinks it's totally insane, but I don't care because it works. And it makes me
Well,
have a little feeling of like self go girl.
and I will actually tell your husband that there is neuroscience to support doing that. Actually, what
Really?
happens when you self-congratulate,
Yeah.
you actually release a little bit of dopamine in your brain, right? Your brain actually responds to that. It actually releases dopamine, and when you show yourself self-compassion, you actually release oxytocin, which is the cuddle hormone.
Okay.
And so your body then will start to, and your brain will start to say, I want more of that self congratulation because I want more of that dopamine.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, that
And
makes
so
sense.
there is a total direct correlation about with congratulating yourself and being compassionate to yourself, and then having that actually build a habit towards you continuing to do that. So you tell your husband that Denise said,
I will.
don't be hard on my friend Erin because she is onto something and she's actually practicing neuroscience. So you need to step off and do some research.
I'm just going to throw a neuroscience in there and just that'll shut him down because he loves
Boom.
good scientific. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I loved in your book when you talked about, you call it the flow afterglow. A
Yes.
lot of us talk about just getting in the zone, but I think flow afterglow is a much more fun reframing of being in the zone. So for
Right.
those of us who are, in various stages of the Corona coaster and
Mm.
just 2020 in general,
Yeah.
and we find ourselves being blocked and we can't access that flow afterglow, what is a good way for us? I mean, where do we start with that? I mean, because obviously there's so many great keys you've given us today, but if
Hmm.
someone's like, why can't I get in my zone? Like, what is the first thing that you would say to them? Like, would you say, if you're not able to get in your zone, I'd recommend this activity? What would you say that would be?
Well, actually, this is actually great. So, little story. When I was writing Banish Your Inner Critic, I had really bad, well, I would say really bad writer's block. It probably was just a case of like more normal writer's block, but it felt particularly poignant at the time. But I had a case of writer's block, and I ended up hiring a writing coach whose book I read, which her book was called Around the Writer's Block, and she talked about how to use neuroscience to get over writer's block. And I was like, you and I are like part of the same tribe. You're speaking my language. Like, let's do this thing. And one of the things that she recommended to me, which ended up being amazing, was she recommended when you're trying to do creative work or you're trying to do any kind of work to relax your brain, because what happens when you're having writer's block, what happens when you can't get in the flow is your inner critic kind of kicks into gear and it stops that process, right? Then actually as a part of the brain, when this part of the brain is active, the creative and flow part of your brain can't actually function. It's pretty
It's
awesome.
so true.
And so what she said was, do this thing for like 15 minutes to an hour in the morning before you start trying to do work, and then go and try to do your creative work. And what she
Okay.
said was, do something creative with your hands. She was like,
Okay.
coloring books, sketching, drawing, knitting, crocheting. I was like, can I make earrings? And she was like, go make yourself some earrings, girl. And I was like, word. And so anything like that, sculpture, building
Yeah.
something with your hands, like anything that will actually, what it does is it actually relaxes your brain. It
Wow.
puts you into a different brainwave mode. It actually puts you into alpha brainwave mode, and it relaxes your brain, and it relaxes that part of the prefrontal cortex, which is actually where the inner critic kind of lives.
Okay.
And you stop being so self-judgmental. You stop trying to modify your behavior and all that stuff, and then you're just focused on the task. And then doing that will kind of help you get into a place where it's easier for you to do the work, and most likely is easier for you to get into a flow state. And then
Ah,
the cool thing about that is then the flow afterglow happens after you're in a flow state. It basically means that once you've been in a flow state, your brain is more predisposed to get into a flow state more easily afterwards for up to 2 days afterwards, right?
wow. Wow.
So just doing this. So if I can just tell you, and actually let me see if I can like angle the camera, but if you can see these little, like right underneath my ear on
Yeah.
this side, there are these
Yeah.
little white boxes.
Yeah.
Those are all earrings that I ended up making. And even these earrings, I did a little something or another with like this side of these earrings. Like I make earrings like nobody's business now. And part of it was through that process of just giving myself permission to do this thing and to do something with my hands. And then it's like the focus and the concentration and the flow and everything that you get in from doing something like that. And then it transfers over and it helps you think more clearly for other tasks.
That is such a doable action
Totally.
item. It's so
Yeah.
doable. It's funny. I just spent a couple weeks in, I call it a book jail in Palm Springs, where I just like
Yeah.
locked myself into a hotel, and I had to write all these words for my new book. And whenever I had writer's block, I just found myself just doodling and scrolling and drawing like
Perfect.
flowers and dogs and just, and
Perfect.
I'm like, what is wrong? This is so weird. Like, what am I? But it did kind of, now I know that it actually had a scientific reason behind it. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, okay, today I need to create the post or create the blog post or send out the email or, write the ad copy or create the presentation, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
take Denise's advice. If you find yourself being blocked and you find yourself saying, my story isn't big enough, I don't have what it takes, whatever that negative narrative is,
Mm-hmm.
just start doing something with your hands. I mean, drawing, I mean, that's so easy. Anyone can just doodle or journal or color,
Totally.
you know?
One of the great suggestions, I was like, I literally never thought of this before. She said, just take a pen and then just like make scribbles on a page and
Yeah.
then just color in the little sections. I
Love
was
it.
like,
You're like, that'll work.
brilliant,
That'll work.
brilliant. Yeah. I made something, and then I ended up liking it so much that I ended up keeping it and then making an envelope out of it, like cutting it in the shape of an envelope and pasting it up, and then I had this like cool, funky, colorful, colored in. Girl, listen,
I love
I
it.
was like,
I love
Roseanne,
it.
Roseanne is on some stuff, and I'm here for it.
Love it. Love it. Well, I think we should all be on Amazon right now and ordering ourselves either some colored pens or some crayons or some highlighters, and go on Amazon and check out Denise Jacobs' book, Banish Your Inner Critic. It was a breakthrough for so many aspects of things. If you're a creator, if you're finding you're feeling blocked, you can't get in the flow, you have the self-doubt, you have the self-judgment, you can't turn off your Sandy or your Norma or whoever that person
Mhm.
is for you, this book can really help you to get going. And in the meantime, Denise, before we jump, I want to have everyone be aware of your Amplify You. You have this incredible new platform
Mhm.
where people who have been listening who are like, I need more Denise, I need more of this in my life. It's about cultivating career confidence. And the URL is amplify-u.com.
That's
Can you
correct.
give us a quick little insight
Yes.
into what that's like?
Yes, so it's an online course, and it is going to be an 8-week online course, and it's going to be very interactive and action oriented. So we're going to focus on having a big goal that you're working towards, and then having modules and exercises that are designed to help you kind of break through the mental blocks that you may have and the parts of the inner critic that'll probably show up to help you get to the place where you can break through those blocks and start to achieve your big goal.
Love it.
Yeah.
So good. And in the meantime, before you check out the course, you can also get a free chapter of Denise's book when you sign up at innercriticbook.com. Denise, this has been just fantastic. Thank you for sharing all your brilliance. Who is someone that you think would be a good guest on the on Highlights podcast that you're reading, maybe a nonfiction author that you're just turning pages and you're just into it?
Well, actually, I was thinking when we were kind of talking earlier, my friend, a friend of mine, Donna Lichthal,
Okay.
is wonderful, and she talks a lot about kind of getting in touch with your inner superhero, and she coaches leaders, especially in the design realm and in tech on how to kind of get in touch with their kind of inner superhero and their inner leader to be able to do what they do even better. And so I was like, she would be a great person to be on here. And you would just love her. She's smart and she's funny and she's super nice and so down to earth. And I think she'd be a treat for you and your followers.
Awesome. Well, we'd love to have her. Thanks for the recommendation.
Oh, and I did want to say one other thing.
Yeah.
Definitely check me out, folks. Check me out on LinkedIn Learning. I'm a LinkedIn Learning author, and I have several courses. I have the Banish Your Inner Critic course on LinkedIn Learning, which has been great and really well received. I also have a course on creative collaboration, and then also a course on how to hack your creative brain. It's under the course Creativity for All. And I have a whole bunch of modules on hacking your creative brain and figuring out how to facilitate flow. So,
Facilitate flow. I cannot
yeah,
wait to check that out. Honestly, what a great silver lining in today's times. You can't get Denise live in the flesh that
yeah.
much anymore, but you can find her in all these great places. I'll put them all in the show notes. You'll have 4, 5, 6 places to go and get more Denise Jacobs, which we all need more of in our life. So, Denise, thank you so much for joining us. You're just a joy, and I
Thank
hope
you
to
for
see
having
you
me.
in soon person.
Yay!
Take care.